Welcome back to a brand new video on the channel, guys. So what I thought I'd bring to you guys today will be a fully comprehensive season review for the entire 2017/18 championship season. So of course, in the championship we only have one game left now. That is of course the championship playoff final. I will be doing a separate prediction video on that later in the week, so you guys have got that to look forward to. But pretty much the season has all been concluded now. So what I thought would be a good thing to do was just reflect on the whole season. So what we'll do in today's video, guys, we're going to go ahead and talk over each individual championship club. I'm going to give them a grading for how I think they've done in this championship season, and as well as that, at the end of the video we're also going to talk about who we think has been the best and worst manager, best and worst signings this season, and all that stuff like that. So of course I'm very interested to get your guys' opinions on what you have made of your team's season and what you made of everyone else in the championship. And I've also got some transfer videos coming up pretty soon as well, guys. Of course, we've already seen some championship clubs go ahead and dip into the market. You know, my club Preston managed to complete the signing of Ryan Ledson the other day, so all that will be discussed in a transfer video fairly soon. But apart from that, guys, let's go ahead and jump into talking over how I think some of these teams have done this season. So we'll start it out at the bottom of the championship and we'll work our way up. So of course we first have to talk about Sunderland, and for their ranking for their season I'm going to go ahead and give them a U, and that cannot really come as a massive surprise to anyone, of course. When Simon Grayson did come into the Sunderland at the start of the season, I'm not gonna lie, I thought it was a pretty good appointment for them. You know, he was a fairly safe pair of hands in the championship. I thought he'd at least be able to galvanise that squad and they get an average mid-table finish. That of course didn't happen, and one thing that I thought that Simon Grayson made a mistake with at Sunderland was he didn't really put too much trust into some of the younger players they have at the club, especially those who have thrived more towards the end of the season. You know, he did put a lot of faith in still some of their big earners at the club, you know, that have let them down time and time again, and maybe going down to League One won't be the worst thing for Sunderland. You know, they may be able to at least stabilise themselves there, at least with some new owners as well, of course. We then saw Chris Coleman come into the job, nothing really improved under him. I think what I find quite funny about Sunderland's season really is they were the only side this season who Wolves didn't go ahead and beat, so realistically that can be the only positive from what has been a very dire season for Sunderland. Then just above them we have Burton Albion, and for Burton I'm going to go ahead and give them a D. Now they do get the best ranking of all the relegated clubs. The reason for that is they of course are working off the lowest budget in the championship, so realistically this probably was to be expected that Burton would get relegated. But the only reason I give them a D is because I still think they could have stayed up really. Of course, their last probably 5 games towards the end of the season we saw an absolute resurgence from their player and from the tactics that Clough was using. I just feel like if they'd gone for some games more this season and not held back as much as they did do earlier on in the season, they probably would have gone ahead and managed to survive and scrape it, although it did come down to the final day and they did get quite unlucky with that. So Burton Albion, they get a D, although I do think they'll be back. They've got some decent players going into League One. Then for Barnsley's season, I'm going to go ahead and give them an E. I think this has been it has just been a failure of a season for Barnsley. I think what I find most disappointing about this as well is the team that Barnsley were promoted with a couple of years ago from League One to the Championship was an absolutely phenomenal team. You know, you think of some of the players they had in that, you know, they had like Conor Hourihane, Sam Winnall up front, they had a brilliant solid defence in there and some more creative players in there as well. Over time, that squad's just been absolutely dissembled, and this season they were a shadow of their former selves. You know, their first season back in the Championship, they took it by storm, especially in that first half of the year. They weren't able to replicate that. Of course, we saw the manager leave and go to Leeds United in Paul Heckingbottom. Although, once again, I still feel like that squad was good enough to stay up. Really, just a couple of mismanagements from Marias, who came into the club later on in the season, and that ended with them getting relegated on the last day. They get an E from me. Then just surviving in the Championship, we of course had Bolton Wanderers. For Bolton's season, I'm going to go ahead and give them a B. I think overall they set out what they achieved to do coming into this season, which was of course Championship survival, and for that I think they get a very solid B, especially when you could take into consideration that they were battling with a transfer embargo this season. They sold their top scorer in January in Gary Medine to Cardiff and didn't really look to replace him. You know, they sold him very late on in that window. When that happened, I honestly thought that it would be lights out for Bolton and they wouldn't be able to recover from it. They went on a couple of inconsistent patches throughout the season, but on the final day, they managed to pull it out of the bag, and for that, they get a solid B from me. Then coming up in 20th place, we then had Reading, and Reading, I'm going to go ahead and give them an E as well. I think this has just been a disaster of a season for Reading. When you look back to last season, how on earth did this side make the Championship playoff final? I know since then they have lost a couple of players, like they lost Danny Williams and Ali Al-Habsi, but, you know, looking over their summer recruitment at the time, I thought they were bringing in some decent players. You know, they spent quite a bit of money. They brought in Sonny Aluko, got Manone in there as well. Bodvarsson I thought would be a decent option. Japstein just completely seemed to lose the plot though. Watching that Reading side play this season, honestly, it just sucks the life out of you. They were without doubt one of the most dull sides to watch in the Championship. Since then, of course, he was sacked and Paul Clement did come to the rescue. Managed to get a couple of their players playing with a bit more flair, really, and of course they did survive in the end, although considering how well they did last season, this season it's an E for them. Into 19th place, we then have Birmingham. Birmingham, I'm going to go ahead and give them a D. I think it has been a bit of a failure of a season for them, really, although they have ended it on a high, and I think that going into next season, they have the foundations now to go ahead and set up and really build up the Championship. You know, I think that Gary Monk is a fantastic manager for them, but over the course of the entire season, we have seen Birmingham play some absolutely atrocious football, you know. I mean, when Steve Cottrell was in charge, we'll go ahead and start at that reign, there was just some absolutely baffling tactical decisions that were being made by him. They were the lowest scorers in the league, and you just couldn't see anything coming from that Birmingham side, you know. Despite some of the great players they had the likes of Magoma, Jota in there, that squad just looked so devoid of creativity and anything going forward, really, until Gary Monk did come in and save the day. So for Birmingham, I'm going to go ahead and give them a D. They spent quite a lot of money in the summer transfer window that wasn't really reflected in the season they had. Just above them, we then had Hull City. I'm going to go ahead and give Hull a C-. Now, the reason I give Hull a C- is they were actually in quite a similar position to Sunderland, really. They were in a relegation battle for the majority of the season, and if they were relegated, this would have been an absolute disaster of a season for them. But one thing I do like about Hull is going forward, they have got some absolutely fantastic players. You know, Jared Bowen's been fantastic. They were very unlucky with Abel Hernandez being out injured for pretty much the entirety of the season, but we have seen Hull being involved in some fantastic games this season. You know, the 5-5 draw against Bristol City does spring to mind, but I think that if they manage to solidify the defence over this summer transfer window and keep hold of some of their big attacking stars, they could be decent next year. Then in at 17th place, we then have Nottingham Forest, and for Forest season, I'm going to go ahead and give them a C. I think overall it has been a very average season for Nottingham Forest, especially when you take into consideration some of the expectations on that club at the start of the year under Mark Warburton. He, of course, wasn't able to deliver with them, and in the end, he was sacked for that. Aitor Karanka, since coming in, he has made them a better side, I would suggest, you know, especially defensively. Under Mark Warburton, they were an absolute shambles, you know. Pretty much any set piece going into the box against Nottingham Forest was going in earlier in the season, so at least Karanka has been able to solidify that defence, although looking over it from start to finish, they have improved on last season, which is a positive, although I'd say that they still have underachieved with that squad they've got. In that 16th place, we're going to have QPR. For QPR, I'm actually going to go ahead and give them a B-. Now, what's interesting about QPR is they have just gone ahead and appointed Steve McLaren as their new manager. So QPR fans, let me know down below what you guys are thinking going into next season. But realistically, the reason I'm going to give them a B- is because I honestly think they've achieved what they set out to do. You know, they were going into the season, actually, they were one of the favourites to go ahead and get relegated under Ian Holloway. What Ian Holloway has been able to do with that QPR squad, though, he's managed to solidify them in a time where they were looking like they could just, you know, go on an absolute free fall. They got rid of some of their higher earners in the last transfer window, and as well as that, he's also been able to integrate some of their young prospects coming up through the ranks into that first team. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and give them a B-, although they have been pretty inconsistent. Sheffield Wednesday, I'm going to go ahead and give them a C. I think it has been a very average season for Sheffield Wednesday, although you can't really put too much of the blame on anyone for that, really, because of course they have had pretty much the whole of that first team just decimated with injuries for the entire season, really. So I think that going into next season, we should see a completely different side with Sheffield Wednesday, of course. Towards the end of the season, they actually ended it on a really nice run of form. Under Carlos Carvajal, this squad didn't really look like it was going anywhere. You know, earlier on in the season, we saw them get battered in the Steel City derby, and since then, the confidence never really seemed to recover until Carlos did leave. So after that, though, I do think that they've ended the season on a high. Players like Anthony Nuhiu and Forestieri and Barry Bannon linking up very well, and going into next season, we should see a different side. Similarly to Sheffield Wednesday, I'm also going to go ahead and give Norwich a C for their season. I think overall it has been a very average, mediocre season for Norwich, really, especially with some of the expectations that they had coming into this season. You know, they were being tipped as one of the favourites to go ahead and make the top 6. Of course, they invested in quite a lot of German talent this season coming over from the Bundesliga. Of course, it was Daniel Farke's first season in charge at Norwich. I wouldn't say they were always brilliant to watch either. You know, some of the games that I managed to catch them, they were, going forward, they just looked very rigid. They didn't look very free-flowing, although when you do catch them at the right times, you know, they have some fantastic players in those attacking positions. You know, James Maddison has been an absolute revolution for them. Josh Murphy, if you catch him at the right moment, is also fantastic, and defensively, they were pretty solid. Leeds United, I'm also going to go ahead and give them a C. I think it was a very mediocre season for Leeds United, especially as well as they brought in some pretty decent talent in that transfer window. You know, they of course did sign some very questionable players in there as well, but of course the standout one will be Samu Sai. Realistically, when he got suspended, that was when everything seemed to go downhill for Leeds. You know, at one point in the season, you know, around about November time, they were really pushing on the door for the playoffs, and it looked like they would continue that form. In the summer transfer window as well, they lost their top scorer in Chris Wood, and Lasogga could never really fill his boots. Then just above them, we then had Ipswich Town slap bang in the middle of the Championship. When you consider that they're not working on one of the biggest budgets in the Championship, especially when you compare it to everyone else around them, I think it's been a fairly solid season for Ipswich, although it has been quite a boring one for them. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and give them a B-, of course. We have seen Mick McCarthy leave the club. I think that, you know, a lot of Ipswich fans were calling for that, although they did make some terrific signings in the summer transfer window. Joe Gon and Martin Waghorn, for the prices that they got them to for, it was just absolutely fantastic. It was just the style of football was just so draining to watch sometimes, but defensively I thought that Ipswich were pretty good. It was just a standard season for them, really. In at 11th, we then had Bristol City. For Bristol City's season, I'm going to go ahead and give them a B. I think when you consider that their last 2 seasons in the Championship, they have been concerned with relegation. Consider that this season, for the majority of it, they were battling it around in and around the playoffs. It has been a vast improvement on previous years. However, it's got to be a disappointment for them to finish 11th in the end, especially the amount of time of the season that they were located in that top 6. Things just at the turn of the year just seem to go wrong for them. You know, 2018 hasn't been the best for them compared to 2017, where at one point it looked like they may go on to make automatic promotion. Bobby Reid, he's been absolutely fantastic for them this season. They have picked up a couple of injuries which didn't help them along the way, although a B, it was an alright season for Bristol City. Then above them, we of course had Sheffield United. For Sheffield United season, I'm going to go ahead and give them a B+. This was of course their first season back in the Championship after their promotion from League One. I think that overall, you know, Sheffield United fans can't really have too many complaints. They, quite similar to Bristol City actually, for large majorities of the season, they were flirting in and around that top 6, and you know, that first 3 months or so of the Championship when Leon Clark was on ridiculous form, they really looked like the real deal at one point. Of course, their form did seem to tail off towards the end of the season. That could be expected. This is their first year back in the Championship, and I think that with a good summer of investment, they really could be the real deal next season. Next up, we then have Brentford. For Brentford's season, I'm going to go ahead and give them a B. I think it has been a fairly solid season for them, really, considering as well they lost Jota in that summer transfer window, you know, probably their best player from last season. When that happened and they lost Harley Dean as well, I really thought that Brentford may struggle this season, and you know, the first month or so they were really struggling. They couldn't pick up a win, but since then they really seem to go ahead and pick up their form, and at times this season they have been one of the best sides to watch in the Championship. The football they play going forward can be absolutely irresistible to watch at times. It just wasn't enough to get them over the line at the end of the season, but I do think that the core of the squad they have at Brentford, they've got a really nice youthful setup there, and with a couple more additions over the summer, I think they will be challenging the top 6 again next season. Next up, we then have Millwall, and for Millwall's season, I'm going to go ahead and give them an A. I think it has been a fantastic season, a phenomenal season really. really for Millwall. Of course, they just missed out on the top 6 in the end, but you can't take anything away from that squad and from Neil Harris as well. And what will be interesting to hear from Millwall fans is, what do you think will happen going into next season? Do you think that this year you've just vastly overachieved, or do you think that you really could build on this? You've set the foundations now for a really solid championship team, and next season you'll only go ahead and do better things, because at times this season Millwall looked absolutely fantastic. Their home form for the entirety of the year was absolutely ridiculous. It was probably one of the hardest places to go to this season. The Den, not many points managed to go ahead and sneak away from there. And when you consider as well, they're working on one of the bottom 3 budgets in the championship. For them to come within a whisker of making the playoffs in the end was an absolutely phenomenal achievement, and Neil Harris just deserves absolutely bucket loads of appreciation for that. So Millwall for there this season, they're going to get an A from me. And then just missing out on the playoffs, we of course had my team Preston North End, and for Preston I'm going to go ahead and give us a B+ for our season. I think it has been, we've exceeded our expectations really. Of course, our last 2 seasons in the championship, we went ahead and finished 11th 2 seasons in a row, and I cannot tell you how good it feels to finish above 11th in the championship. If we finish there again, I honestly think I may have lost my sanity. But Alex Neil has just brought something new to this Preston side. Under Simon Grayson in our previous few years, we were always solid, but we would never really excel on that. You know, as soon as we did get to that mid-table spot in the championship, we never really want to kick on and really go for the playoffs. This year, in Alex Neil's first season in charge at Preston, we really wanted to have a go, and we really did do that. And I think that with a couple more players signed over this transfer window, next season I am feeling quite optimistic, I must say. Of course, we've already gone ahead and signed Ryan Ledson, and I think that the spine of our team at Preston, I honestly think it is a really good one. You know, we've got players in there, we don't have many big egos in that team, but all the work ethics and the will to win is all there in that side. And I really think that if we are able to keep hold of our big players over this transfer window, who knows what could happen next season. But for this year, I'm going to go ahead and give my club a B+. Then for Derby season, I'm going to go ahead and give them a B. I think that overall it was quite a solid year for Derby, really. Of course, they did go ahead and make it into the playoffs, so maybe I could have given them a higher rating than that. Although, I do think that, you know, going into this season, you know, they did spend quite a bit of money. They were expected to be in and around this part of the table. Of course, they did lose the playoff semi-finals in the end. They lost to Fulham. You can't really put that against Derby, though. You know, Fulham have just been ridiculous this season, of course. In that second leg, they just couldn't get over the line, and Fulham did beat them 2-1 on aggregate in the end. But I think that, you know, towards the end of the season, Tom Lawrence started to come to his own, really. You know, he was struggling a little bit with patches of inconsistency, really, but I think that going into next season we should see the best of Tom Lawrence in that Derby setup. As well as that, they've also got some other players in there, you know, Mate Vidra going ahead and winning the Golden Boot in the end. It just wasn't enough for them. In at 5th, we then had Middlesbrough, and for Middlesbrough's season, I'm actually going to go ahead and give them a B-. I'd be interested to hear what some Middlesbrough fans have to say about this season as a whole, really. When you take into account that Middlesbrough were the biggest spenders in the Championship this season, for them to not be challenging for automatic promotion at any stage of the season, and of course they did go on to lose the playoff semi-final to Aston Villa, I'm going to go ahead and give them a B-. That may be a bit harsh on them, but overall I think that this season, you know, under Gary Monk, this Middlesbrough side was going absolutely nowhere, and he just couldn't seem to get anything out of them. Since Tony Pulis has come in, though, he's made them a much more rigid side and a lot more solid, really. Not always the best side to watch in the Championship. I think that Middlesbrough fans would agree with that, but I think that going into next season, they've at least got something to build on now, you know, as opposed to when they had Gary Monk. You know, I don't know what I was watching whenever I saw Middlesbrough play, but for them, I'm going to go ahead and give them a B-. It wasn't an awful season for them, but I think they failed to achieve what they set out to do, really. Then in at 4th, we then have Aston Villa. For Aston Villa's season, I'm going to go ahead and give them an A-. I think that overall, it has been a very good season for Aston Villa, and they are now in the playoff final against Fulham, of course. Over the 2 legs against Middlesbrough, they weren't the best of games, really, of course, winning 1-0 on aggregate in the end, but it doesn't matter how you get there. Steve Bruce has guided this side to another Championship playoff final for him, and going into the final, I think that Aston Villa fans, let me know down below how you guys are feeling. But overall this season, considering that last season Aston Villa were just a monumental flop with how much they went ahead and spent last season to only go ahead and finish mid-table, this season they've shown a vast improvement on that, although the only disappointing thing from my perspective was I was really anticipating them to be pushing the top 2 this season. That's not really been the case. They've always been in the top 6, but they just couldn't go that extra step and push for the top 2. Then in our third, we then have Fulham, and for Fulham's season, I'm going to go ahead and give them an A, of course. In the end, they did miss out on automatic promotion on the final day of the season, but that may not matter, of course. They are now in the Championship playoff final, like I said before, and just watching Fulham play this season has been an absolute joy. And if they do go up to the Premier League, I think that that squad of players will really go ahead and excel there, really. You know, some of the players in there are more than suited for Premier League football. And considering as well they went on a ridiculous unbeaten run, of course, that was lost on the final day of the Championship, but going unbeaten from like December to May is absolutely unprecedented in the Championship, and they played some fantastic football along the way, and going forward they scored some magnificent goals. In our second, we then have Cardiff City, and for Cardiff season I'm going to go ahead and give them an A+. Of course I am. Cardiff this season, no one was anticipating this, let's be honest lads. We had Cardiff City, a team who, when Neil Warnock inherited that squad, they were sat in the relegation zone of the Championship, and for such a quick turnaround, he's gone ahead and guided them to the Premier League, which is just an absolutely phenomenal achievement. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Cardiff play the best brand of football. I think we all know that's not the case, you know, especially towards the end of the season. They really had to go in and grind out these results, but when you consider the resources that Neil Warnock had at that club, I think he's done a terrific job. Of course, he has spent money, you know, he spent a lot of money on Gary Medine, and seemingly that wasn't really too necessary, but even so, Cardiff have had a phenomenal season, and for that, they get an A+. I'd be interested to hear from Cardiff fans, who do you think you need to sign to go ahead and ensure your Premier League survival next season? Where do you think you need to strengthen? Let me know down below. And then, of course, winning the Championship, I'm, of course, going to give Wolves an A+. Now, of course, we did see Wolves spend quite a bit of money this season in the transfer window. Not the most, I must point out, you know, Middlesbrough were the highest spenders, and we all know that in the Championship, money doesn't always guarantee success, but the brand of football which Nuno did bring to the Championship this season was an absolute joy to watch at times, and he managed to integrate Championship experience with Portuguese flair just seamlessly, really, you know, considering as well that Wolves last season were just an absolutely bang average side, you know, under Paul Lambert and Walter Zenga, things just weren't clicking for them, and even then they had some brilliant flair players like Helder Costa and Ivan Cavallero. And going into the Premier League, you know, the sky's the limit for that Wolves side, you know. I do get quite a lot of people telling me that there's a massive gap between the Premier League and the Championship, but when I look at the bottom half of the Premier League and the top half of the Championship, I don't think there's a huge gap to go ahead and bridge, you know. The top 6 of the Premier League are, of course, a mile ahead of everyone else, but below that, I honestly think that Wolves could challenge everyone else next season, especially with, you know, the ambition that the owners have showed there. So for them, they get an A+ this season. So guys, there were all my rankings for what I thought of every Championship club season this year for the 2017/18 season. So do you guys agree with my rankings? Let me know down below. And just before we go ahead and wrap up this video, guys, I thought what I'd do is go ahead and talk you through who I think has been the best and worst manager this season, best and worst signing, and all that good stuff like that. So let me know who you guys are thinking in the comments down below. So in terms of the worst Championship manager this season, for me it's got to be Steve Cottrell. When he was in charge of Birmingham, he was an absolute disaster. Whenever I watched that side when he was in charge of them, they were going absolutely nowhere. He made some absolutely baffling tactical decisions, and when you consider how well Gary Monk has done with the same group of players, I mean, he was just shown to be a bit of a fraud. In terms of the best bargain signing for the Championship this season, I'm actually going to go ahead and say that will be Martin Waghorn, who of course signed from Rangers going to Ipswich this season. He was purchased in the end for under $500,000, and considering he was involved with 27 goals in the Championship this season, no player has been involved in more goals than Martin Waghorn. And when you consider that he was playing in an Ipswich side managed by Mick McCarthy, you know, famously, who don't score too many goals, next season under an attacking manager, I think that Martin Waghorn will really fly for them. In terms of the biggest fraud overall, that's going to go to Jack Rodwell of Sunderland. This season in the Championship, he was earning £70,000 a week, and for that, he only went ahead and made one start in the Championship, and since then has been playing for the Sunderland under-23s for 70 grand a week. That's just ridiculous. Best player in the Championship this season, for me personally, that has to be Ruben Neves. I think that overall, you know, a lot of people have said that they thought that Sessegnon had a better year than Neves. For me personally, when you watch Ruben Neves play, he's that player who just makes Wolves absolutely tick this season. Considering as well, he's popped up with quite a few worldies, and going into the Premier League, I do hope that he stays at Wolves, really. You know, if he was to go to a top 6 side, he wouldn't always play, but going into the Premier League with Wolves, I really want to see what he can do next season. In terms of the worst signing, I'm actually going to go ahead and give that to Sone Aluko of Reading. Considering that last season with Fulham, he looked fantastic at times, he wasn't able to continue that into Reading. They spent a lot of money on him, and under the Apstan especially, he just looked a shadow of his former self. The best manager this season in the Championship, I'm going to go ahead and give it to Neil Warnock. I think that coming in at close second has to be Nuno and Neil Harris, but Neil Warnock, for what he's achieved this season, he is a top wind-up merchant in the Championship. A lot of people love to hate him, really, but I think that overall what he's achieved, he is the best manager this season. But guys, that will now wrap it up for this video, so thank you so much for watching, and that was my fully comprehensive Championship season review for the 2017/18 season. So thank you guys for all your support on all the videos this season. I will have a Championship playoff final prediction video coming out later in the week. But apart from that, guys, that will now wrap it up for this one. So if you have enjoyed, make sure you do leave a like. It is always massively appreciated. And go ahead and subscribe for a bit of regular Championship content. But apart from that, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.